Hello and welcome to the 15th episode of the KurosawaCast, the podcast where I, Rob, a Kurosawa aficionado, guide my good friend, the film teacher and filmmaker Craig, through the canon of Akira Kurosawa for the first time. Hello, Craig. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a lovely day. Been out for a socially distant walk.
Excellent.
Having a lovely weekend.
Lovely. Excellent. Let's get to it. We're talking about The Bad Sleep Well today, which is from 1960. I haven't actually checked alongside all of his films, but it's got to be within his top 5 longest films, right? Like
I would imagine so.
It's over 2.5 hours, yeah, and it's
Hmm.
it actually I'll get more into sort of context stuff later on as usual, but it actually the version shown outside of Japan up until I guess fairly recently was significantly cut down. There's a lot of stuff that's actually quite vital to the plot that in the Donald Ritchie book he talks about just being completely excised from the version shown in the US and Europe, which is crazy. But yeah, so last time around, we always end the episode with you sort of predicting what you think going in blind this Kurosawa film's going to be. What was your preconception for The Bad Sleep Well?
Based on the idea that it was sort of loosely based on Hamlet, I was expecting some sort of corporate espionage thriller. And I was quite interested to see how the Hamlet kind of comparisons hold up and how much of an analog there is for a lot of things. And I think it's fair to say that's exactly what it is, really, isn't it? It's a corporate noir, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It totally
and can
is.
I just say at the top of the episode as well, it's an absolute banger. It's really, really good. I was really surprised when I finished watching this that it isn't spoken about more highly within his canon. Because I'd never heard of it. And even I think last week was the last one we talked about Hidden Fortress.
Yeah.
And I was saying how enjoyable that is. And I can understand Seven Samurai's place in film history, but as a 3.5 hour film, it's not an everyday watch. And I guess this, as a 2.5 hour film, you'd say this as well. But this is so gripping, enjoyable, just a really well constructed thriller. I'm surprised that it hasn't, like I say, got a larger place in the canon, because it's just so entertaining.
It's interesting because Donald Ritchie in his book, which I often refer to on this podcast, he talks about the film as a failure, as one of Kurosawa's failures, not in the sense, because he talks about how masterful it is in terms of filmmaking, but he talks about how Kurosawa wanted to make a socially conscious kind of social problem film about corporate greed and corruption, and how on those terms Kurosawa felt that it fails, and how Ritchie also thinks it doesn't work that way, which is interesting because the same thing happens every time Kurosawa tries to make a film about the issues, like in Scandal, like in I Live in Fear. Only out of that trilogy of the issues movies, this is the one that by far and away is the superior movie, right?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't put it down as a social realist thriller.
No,
and if that's what he was going for, then yeah, I'd say he probably failed. But but as a like a talk kind of the sort of thing Sidney Pollack would make, it just kind of it flies, absolutely flies.
I really enjoyed it. Actually, this is one that I think I've seen like a lot of them for about the third time, and I enjoyed it this time more than any other time. I think it's one of those that's kind of gained a level of appreciation from me as well. So I'll talk very high level about what the film's about. So basically, obviously we go full spoilers on this. Mifune plays this guy who at the beginning is a bit like the Deer Hunter. It starts with a very long like wedding sequence.
Or the Godfather.
The Godfather as well. Yeah, you're right. There's like a whole sort of program you could do of films that begin with a big wedding. So there's this wedding at the beginning, and these journalist characters straight out of Scandal like turn up at this wedding, and they're all kind of gossiping and bitching about the people in the wedding, because it's the wedding of the daughter, the disabled without any specific. There's no specific disability she's given. She's got kind of a gammy leg.
She's got one big shoe.
Yeah, she got one big shoe, and but she's getting married to Toshiro Mifune, who is introduced as this bloke who doesn't have any living parents or any living relatives, and this daughter
is kind of suspected as a sort of corporate climber.
Yes.
Like there's this whole thing, I mean, which is really quite ridiculous, because she's got this kind of unspecified disability, and there is a bit of backstory to it as well. But she's this really who's the actress?
Isn't it Kyoko Kagawa?
Yes, incredibly beautiful actress, but there's this whole subplot that doesn't work, which is like no one's going to want to marry her because she's got this disability.
Exactly. There's this. I was saying that to Jen, my wife, while I was watching it, is that she's very much like movie disabled. You know, from the time she's got this kind of affliction that doesn't really impact anything to do with her apart from just people feeling sorry for her quite a lot, and her kind of being just like weak to the point where if someone shouts in her presence, she'll like faint or something. She reminded me a lot of the little girl in Scandal, Takashi Shimura's sickly daughter, who really only exists to kind of be a moral kind of bellwether to sort of the sickly daughter in Scandal's there to basically go, oh, I believe you're good, towards the Takashi Shimura. The moral totem. Yeah, the moral totem here, and she's not particularly well-developed character in her own right, but you know, it's mainly a film about these men fighting with each other in this kind of corporate sphere. So basically, what happens is there's this wedding. Toshiro Mifune is getting married to the girl. She is the daughter of this very important man in this corporation, and the media people have come to the wedding and are standing at the back sniping everybody because arrest warrants are being handed out during the wedding to various people associated with this company, because there's this great sort of corruption scandal, this graft going on. And it turns out that these guys, basically, whenever something like this happens, they just conveniently make the people who have the evidence kill themselves. Just people, very sort of subservient culture in Japan where people are very deferential towards the people in charge, and so they manage to always get their underlings to just kill themselves, throw themselves to a volcano, whatever. That's an actual one they try and do in this one. It emerges sort of halfway through the film that Mifune's actually he's under a cover identity, and he was actually the son of one of the previous guys they made kill himself, and he's gotten himself into this corporate ladder not to try and take advantage, as the press people think, and to become really wealthy and take over the company. He wants to bring it down, and so he's kind of working his machinations to gather all the evidence and bring this thing down with tragic consequences. It's a film with not even a bittersweet ending. It's just a bad ending, isn't it? Like Mifune gets killed, the corporate guys all get away with it. The only bad thing that happens to the corporate guy is that his kids go, you know what, you're an asshole, we're going now. But you also get the sense after that he doesn't care. Hence the title, you know, the bad sleep well. He's kind of completely morally impervious to a bit like Trumpism, right? Like you kind of get this thing with Trump. Trump is without shame, right? You can't shame Trump. I mean, there is that little tiny little hint at the end, a little kind of ambiguity where he says good night instead of good day, and then says I didn't sleep very well last night, and you kind of you know, I think that you can read that. There's a little seed of doubt just to give people the chance to argue over the ending, I think. Yeah, there's also I really love the ending, and the clear implication is he's on the phone to somebody more senior than him, and the thing being that even if Mifune had managed to take this guy down, like it goes much deeper, much further than this man. That it's kind of a fool's errand, this whole thing. That the corruption goes a lot deeper. There's actually a quote from Kurosawa about that, where he is talking in the Donald Ritchie book. He's talking about how he feels he didn't go far enough with that. He feels like that was left too vague, and he wished he had kind of made a bigger point of it. But he wasn't brave enough to do it because he felt like in Japan you can't question those people, and it's very difficult in Japan to question people in authority. And I think that if you want to call it bravery in that case, as he does, a lack of bravery, then I think his cowardice saves the film, because we've seen Kurosawa when he feels brave enough to be didactic, and it rarely goes well. And I think if he had managed to indulge, if he'd felt brave enough to actually make a big point about it at the end and have them stand up and say, this man's much more senior, and the thing goes on, we probably would have had a 20-minute monologue of somebody saying that. So
I think
and I
think it's also a lot truer, isn't it? I mean, these kind of public issue films that you get, like something like for example, the American version of it, something like Erin Brockovich, which is a great film, absolutely great film based on a true story. But kind of leaves out the fact that all the water was still contaminated sort of when she finished prosecutions, and like years later the problem was never really fixed, kind of thing. But it does. American public issue films like try and leave you on a kind of a triumphalist note, and the cynic in me seems to think that it's things are rarely work out on the side of on the good guys at that sort of level, I think.
Yeah, it's similar to Akira, I suppose. I mean, Akira obviously is bittersweet, the ending, and there's the feeling that, well, he did make a small difference. He made a difference for these children in this park and this family living in this area. But there's very much the sense that he, as a cog in this sort of like government bureaucracy, his impact is very small, and that the whole system is going to rumble on and do the same things it always did, regardless of the stand he made. And you kind of that's in this film without the bittersweetness. It's just bitter. There is no sweetness. So should we start talking about that wedding scene? Because
this is right from the off, like you're saying. You asked me last time how much I knew about the aspect ratio of
Hidden Fortress.
Hidden Fortress, which I it's a beautifully shot film. But do you remember when The Hateful Eight came out and there was all that fuss about it being shot in I can't remember if it was
the wider
super wide, yeah. And they were like, well, it's interiors, so why, yeah. But this is like, because it's shot inside this beautiful kind of wedding venue in this ultra wide screen, like it looks incredible from the off. Just the staging, the blocking, the way that people are sort of fill the screen and move forwards and backwards and come in from the sides. And so much kind of the way that the bridal walk kind of happens towards the camera as well, and the photographers come in and fan out across the room. It's just really, really beautifully kind of blocked and staged to have these really I don't know, almost kind of, God, I sound like such a wanker. Like these sort of tableau images that just kind of bleed one into the other. It also kind of reminded me a hell of a lot, actually, of Wes Anderson. In place, there's a lot of symmetry going on, and it was like, oh, I think Wes Anderson might have seen this film once upon a time.
I what you mean. There's, without wishing to, because this could sound sort of pejorative, but he does spend a lot of the film, rather than fast cutting, which we've seen he can do. Kurosawa can do a fast cutting edit. He can do dynamic camera movements and things. We've seen him do those things in the past. But in this film, he definitely sort of plonks the camera down in one spot, has a really nice composition set up, and then leaves it alone. And characters walk in and out of sort of around the frame, and things to unfold like at the wedding. But there are relatively, I'm not one of those people who's counted the cuts and counted how long the shots last. But I'd be willing to bet this has got to be one of the most sedate, least with the fewest cuts and the longest shots. Like a lot of the scenes in this movie are oneers, aren't they? They're just the camera plugged down in a room, and the people in the room having their full conversation in front of the camera. But it is very cinematic.
I mean, the camera does move.
Sometimes it pans, sometimes it zooms out.
And,
yeah, but very subtly.
Yeah, and it's very similar to the way that Spielberg handles one shots, where within the same shot, without you realizing, you would have seen a wide, a close, a two shot, a medium. He just moves the camera and gets the very smooth blocking in to get all of that information across, and just use the frame to its absolute full potential.
Yeah, I think this is possibly his best use of widescreen. Like I obviously am yet to rewatch Kagemusha and Ran, which are obviously massive epics and maybe more traditionally what people think of as like a widescreen film. But in this, I noticed this time, and once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it, was the fact that he seems to have written this film very specifically for widescreen, because there's a wide cast of characters, 10 or more characters, a dozen characters in this film, but the film always manages to contrive a way to end up that we're with 3 of them at a time. And then when we're with 3 of them, they're usually very neatly divided on the screen, like between sort of the screen is very neatly divided either evenly in rectangles, or a sort of triangle is formed between the 3 characters, and the 3 characters will sort of move around the frame, but they'll always keep that harmony of the kind of composition. And it's really amazing the way he does that in this film, and it's really interesting the fact that he kind of uses widescreen in that way. And I really like, particularly, there's a scene later on. You were talking about how in a single shot he might do a wide and a close up, and all these kind of things. Do you remember there's one where the brother of the disabled girl is of Mifune's wife? He's listening into a conversation going on between Shimura and the character played by Mori, and basically he's in the foreground, like he's listening at the door, and his face is basically in close-up, and they're through the crack in the door, and they're in the background. And I was thinking, like, this would be 2 shots in a 4:3 film. This would be 2 different shots, because to the left here you've got Shimura and the guy in the room, and they are basically taking up a sizable chunk of the screen, and they're kind of fully in there. And then he is in close-up essentially on the right. And it's it's really striking.
Sorry, I just double checked Maury, and I didn't realize Maury was the idiot.
Yeah, it's I was going to bring that up, and in fact, I said about Maury in on my Letterboxd review you might have seen. Like he's he's much more convincing because he's not that much older than Mifune. He's like 9 years older than Mifune. He's much more convincing old man than Mifune is in I Live in Fear, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's not a complete. It's a really good performance. I'm just shocked that he can go from one to the other. Yeah,
you get all of Kurosawa's regulars in this, and you even get the I always forget his name, the Sagata Sanshiro guy, Fujima, isn't it? He turns up at the beginning very briefly at the wedding. There's a place for everyone in the Bad Sleep Well. Also mention while we're talking about the actors that Kyoko Kagawa, you may recognize her as the Japanese lady in the Story of Film, that at the beginning of every episode Mark Cousins is like, and this woman Kyoko Kagawa is arguably the greatest film ever made, and that's him talking about her being in Tokyo Story. But she's in Tokyo Story. She's in at least 2 of the most celebrated Mizoguchi movies. She's really great in Sancho the Bailiff. So she's a very big presence in Japanese cinema of the period and in a lot of very notable films. But I think this is her first and potentially only Kurosawa appearance.
Just a little side note on that. Sorry, this is a complete. I've been digging through Story of Film.
Oh yeah,
and I found myself. I found myself starting to read it out loud in Mark Cousins' voice when I've been sat here alone.
Yeah,
just to practice my impression. But that's how I was amusing myself earlier today. Was reading that aloud in his voice.
Yeah, I just checked Letterboxd while you were getting your book out, and she is in the next couple of. Well, she's not in the Ajimbo Sanjuro, but she's in High and Low and Redbeard as well. Okay. So she's in a few Kurosawas, but yeah, very very important actress of the period. So yeah, the wedding. Let's go back to the wedding. So the press characters, something really strange about this for me is that like the press characters are so foregrounded in the wedding sequence and then basically disappear till the end. They're almost like a kind of Greek chorus or something, aren't they, at that point?
Yeah, I
And you
mean,
get this.
I've put it here actually. Like, as great as this film is, there are a couple of little kind of things that I've noticed. No, I'm not going to say shortcomings, but a few little maybe shortcuts that Kurosawa takes occasionally, and the pests do sort of become a little kind of expedition dump, like traveling
Yeah,
expedition dump throughout the scene. In that way that they start talking about things that would have been really interesting to see. Like you get in I Live in Fear or the second half of Ikiru, you get that kind of, or those text pages on uh, those who tread in the tiger's tail. You do get a little bit of them kind of just sort of. It's quite nice actually because it is like people. It's a very formal wedding in which the company is seems to be the most important thing about the wedding. Is like talking about the
yeah.
corporate structure, which is quite funny.
That wedding speech where someone just needs to distance themselves from the people that are involved in the scandal, and they leave the congratulations to the bride and groom to one sentence at the very end, but most of it is just about how they aren't actually associated with this company.
And it's kind of, although it is a little bit of them being like a exposition Greek chorus, it also is a little bit like the people who aren't particularly close to the wedding sitting at the back tables gossiping about everybody. I think we've all been at those weddings where we've just sort of like heard all sorts of bits and pieces. So it's quite fun, even if it's handled quite well, even if it's exposition dumpy. Yeah, but I did notice that as well. But I love how it is. Although it is a wedding, it's kind of it's like a PR campaign for the company as well. And you also get the sense that the bride, as well as she's doing her bridal walk, you're not quite sure what she's thinking or feeling because she seems a bit trepidatious, and is you get this you kind of get the sense of I mean, it starts that you start to wonder if she really wants to get married but that all kind of plays out in a different way. But there is this kind of almost sense of a sham about it to begin with, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's it. I think that's definitely there in the wife or the bride to be at this point in her trepidation, as you mentioned, because I think she suspects because at this point they're not in love, are they? The thing in the film is Mifune falls in love with her in the course of this marriage, sort of by accident, and it's his falling in love with her that in part is a catalyst for his downfall, really. I don't know Hamlet particularly well. It was never one of the Shakespeare plays I had to do at school, so as a result, I really don't know anything about Hamlet. But I mean, how closely you seem a bit more familiar with it? How sort of relevant is any of that to Hamlet?
Not massively. I mean, Hamlet is all about Hamlet's like so he suspects and then knows that his uncle killed his father and then married his mother, but he kind of mopes around, sort of half looking for evidence, half wondering whether or not he should do anything, and then he's got a sort of semi love interest who kind of he ignores and then eventually kills their father and by accident, and then she goes mad and kills herself, and it's in the killing of that father that he kind of his downfall happens because he's challenged to a fight by her brother, and then his uncle gets involved and kind of poisons. There's a lot of poison at the end, and then everybody's dead. So it doesn't fit perfectly. Like if you were to take Mifune as the Hamlet character, like he doesn't have that indecision, and he doesn't have that. He's a very, very focused, very calculating figure who, even when his cover is blown, like he immediately gets, he immediately changes his plan and sets a new plan straight away in motion, and he's very focused on what he's doing. So from that point of view, like he's a very, very different character to Hamlet. And I guess there's kind of like that kind of the father-in-law or stepfather. The dynamics are slightly different, really, but it's still about struggle for power at the top amongst. Although in Hamlet's not particularly worried about his place on the throne. He just kind of wants justice for his father. So I guess that's similar as well.
Yeah, it's very loose. It's a very loose adaptation, isn't it? For what I understand. And in the Ritchie book, he talks about how Kurosawa, when asked about the comparisons to Hamlet, always sort of dismissed them. So the fact that we talk about it as a Hamlet, like it gets spoken about like it's Kurosawa's version of Hamlet. Kurosawa never really acknowledged that it was Hamlet, which, you know, doesn't mean to say that's not in there and that's not part of the DNA of it. And we know that Kurosawa is a fan of Shakespeare and you know, for example, Throne of Blood, and is really knowledgeable about those plays. So it's obviously an influence, but it isn't an adaptation of Hamlet, is it? You wouldn't put it on and say, "Oh, you love Hamlet. This is a cracking version."
Yeah, exactly.
If Hamlet's your cup of tea.
Yeah, it's no more Hamlet than The Lion King is really Hamlet. You know what I mean? It's not.
Yeah. Or Clueless is whichever one that's supposed to be. If the
Emma, I think.
Is that Emma? There we go.
I think so.
I don't know. I'm showing my ignorance there. So someone I really wanted to point out is Katamari Fujiwara, who we've never really spoken about specifically. And he is the fella who plays Wada in this, who is the guy who's going to throw himself in the volcano. He's kind of an underling. He's an assistant who's going to take the fall because he knows too much, and the prosecutors are squeezing him, and he's going to jump into a volcano. And Mifune saves him and then uses him as a ghost to brilliant effect. I really love those scenes where he's in the street and the headlights are on him.
Yeah.
But he's fantastic in this. My favorite scene in this film, like,
do you know what? I tell you what, this is a weird pull as well. Do you know what that really reminded me of?
What?
That really reminded me of and the scenes are set up differently, and they're doing different things, and they have different purposes. But for some reason, it brought to mind Nightmare on Elm Street, where when Freddy's wandering down the back alleys in one of the dreams. But anyway, it just kind of that just hit me when I watched that for some reason. But anyway,
I want to say about Fujiwara, to give context to him, like he famously plays the peasant who's the father in Seven Samurai, who's got the daughter who's very protective of. He's also one of the two kind of scoundrels in Hidden Fortress, but he's got roles in most of Kurosawa's films of this period. Like, there's always a space. He's got quite a prominent role in The Lower Depths. Like, he's in most of Kurosawa's films this period. And this is probably my favorite performance of his. I really love him in this role. He gives great coward. He gives great fear face in general in pretty much all of those aforementioned roles, but he's really great here. I think my favorite scene in this film,
is it the bit where Mifune drives him to his own funeral?
Yeah, that's, for me, that's the funeral watching scene is the best scene in the film, hands down. I absolutely love it. I love the placement of the car on the hill, so that they're looking through the windscreen, but they're looking like down over another car, like over at the funeral. It feels so like, this is such a weird pull, and it's like so irrelevant to anyone listening. But like, coming from Brighton, right? Brighton's quite hilly, isn't it?
And, it's very hilly.
It's very hilly, and being in a car parked looking kind of down a hill at something just feels very real to me. Like, it feels like a view that I can imagine being in.
I know what you mean.
Moment. Do you know what I mean? And like the rain's lashing down, they're like watching this thing going through the windshield.
I love the fact that he's so distressed at watching his own funeral, and Mifune kind of turns on the radio, and there's like some jaunty jazz or something going on in the background as well, and Mifune's kind of like
reveling in it a little bit, isn't he?
He is, because he knows that this guy probably had something to do with his father's suicide, but he's not quite sure what, so he's not above kind of torturing him a little bit. And that whole scene as well, the sort of the pulling up and everything, it's starting to look like 70s American thrillers as well. It's starting to look like things like French Connection and Conversation. And as you watch the two of the guys, kind of, they're there paying being seen at the funeral, but sort of wandering from these across these shrines, just talking about business and kind of just being completely disrespectful as well. It's such a good scene. It just kind of just sets up it just feels like at that point the tone of the film and kind of the direction of the film is so firmly established that you're really in for the ride at that point.
I especially love in that screen. We've already talked about its use of widescreen. I love the close-ups of the Fujiwara character, Wada, I think his name is. I love the close-ups of his eyes. There are so many bits where the full frame is sort of like him looking through the windshield, sort of slightly over the windshield, so his full face isn't in view, and then he'll be like cut off at the top, and it will just be sort of his eyes reacting to things. I just think those shots are really cool, really impactful. I really like that sequence. I mean, what would you say your sort of standout favorite sort of sequence of the film is?
I mean, I really liked that scene that we both liked. I love the scene where Mifune has been and emptied out a safe, and he's kind of stashed the money and he's trying to pin it on somebody, and he's sitting there at the desk filing papers, and the guy has had to go back to them and say, look, everything's gone. There was nothing in this deposit box. And they send him back out, and he comes out and all the money's in his bag. And he's like, what the hell's going on here? And Mifune's just sort of sitting there kind of nonchalantly going about his business, pulling all the strings around him as this fella's kind of framed basically for stealing. It's really, really strong stuff. He's such a badass in that scene as well, because he's his father-in-law's secretary, and he doesn't do anything. He's already done it all. He just sits and waits for it to play out. It's such a good scene.
It's really great, and I think one of the notes I made actually in this film is that when Mifune in his early career, when Mifune had to play the straight man, when he had to play the normal guy, he got lost in the film, right? Like watching Quiet Duel, he's kind of a non-entity in Quiet Duel because he just is this like guy in a doctor suit being boring. He also arguably disappears in Stray Dog. Like Stray Dog's a really strong film, but the Shimura character is so much more entertaining than the Mifune one, who's relatively straight. Whereas this is maybe the first film where Mifune is sort of mature enough as an actor where he plays the straight guy, the guy who doesn't have a crazy scene. He doesn't have a bit where he rants and raves. He doesn't get to pull crazed faces and react to things in a big way, which are kind of Mifune staples. He's just a very restrained character, but he's got such a presence now.
I think it comes down to the fact that most of the stuff that his character does, he does off screen. It's all pre-prepared. It's all set up, and we're watching people react to his machinations most of the time, like in that scene there. So he can be really still and really quiet, and as soon as we know that he's the one who's the puppet master, if you like, it kind of adds that power to it, because you're watching him waiting for him to slip up or give something away, which he never does. When he's found out, it's through no fault of his own, really.
There's definitely something to that.
And so that his kind of calm collectedness is kind of a counterpoint to what you're experiencing as an audience. And it's such a quiet strength to the character, that he gets away with doing very, very little. I think it's strength of the writing as well.
I agree, but I think in earlier films he didn't, when he didn't have a lot of shouting and ranting and gurning to do, he also didn't really know how to, I don't know, have that presence on screen either. I don't think, and I think, because I said this about Hidden Fortress, that it's more or less from Hidden Fortress on, he only really plays kind of fairly stoic, fairly rigid badasses. And whereas before that, if you'd had to say what a Toshiro Mifune role is, it's the guy in Rashomon, the guy in Seven Samurai, jumping around, shouting, exaggerated expressions, And he definitely seems to have matured and grown much more into the point where he can do less and still be interesting.
We've talked a lot about him and Shimura as the kind of the mainstays of Kurosawa's filmography, and early doors in the early films, you get the sense of Shimura's the one who really deserved all the praise and that kind of stuff. I think Shimura's certainly getting smaller roles as we watch on, and that is part of it, I guess. But Mifune, like you say, seems to be maturing as a performer and sort of expanding his range as well. I mean, yes, he's a quiet, stoic badass, but it's in a different way. It's not a physical role. It's manipulative. It's all psychological. It's all kind of Machiavellian. So it's just it is I don't know. It's just a role that I've not seen him nail before.
Because you mentioned Shimura, there is a bit I wanted to mention where he goes and investigates. He starts to suspect that the person behind these machinations is probably a relative or somebody to do with this dead guy. So he goes on a little investigation to find out if this dead guy actually did have a kid or something they don't know about. And he finds out about this guy's former wife, and he finds out about this kid. And then he gets shown, he's like, "Oh, do you have a picture?" And they go, "Oh, yeah, I think he's this guy in the background at this funeral." And they point at the picture. And I think you'll agree here, like, if you've seen enough Shimura up to this point, you know exactly what his reaction face is going to be like to the camera when he sees the photo. Like he gives full Shimura face. Like he comes right up to the camera with a really kind of like, oh, just like the really just all-encompassing Shimura reaction that he does. And also sort of, and I don't even mean this in a bad way, but it's unintentionally hilarious, that photo. Like it's amazing because it's so dramatic, it's so posed, and Mifune is so obvious in it. It's like the way the woman describes the photo is like, "Oh yeah, there's this guy behind a post like outside the funeral," and you kind of think he's going to be like off in the background, but he's like a meter away from everybody else, just going, and he's like literally like going.
That is the one thing that is. I mean, like a couple, like there are moments towards the end because that happens with 50 minutes to go, which I thought was quite. I wasn't expecting it to have that much of the film left to change. So I was that happened quite early, and I would also, I don't know at the time, but watching, it's not a twist. I mean, there's no surprise when Mifune is revealed to be his son. It's something you can see sort of coming a mile off. I felt anyway. But there are bits where obviously with the love story as well, and the fact that it's family dynamic, there's so many great scenes as well when you kind of realize that, where you're in the house with them, and the president of the public corporation is sort of cooking with his family, and they're all having this little family it's a very kind of cuckoo in the nest kind of thriller, but with the love story, with the family dynamics, it occasionally becomes a little bit soapy.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
I didn't really notice that myself.
Not, or threatened to. It threatened to tip into a little bit of melodrama for me but I don't think it necessarily does. I just, it was on that. It was pointing towards that at places, but probably kind of just steers the right side of it. I also noticed in there as well, we talked about Kurosawa Partridge in previous podcasts.
Yeah,
there is a line in it that is pure Alan Partridge that one of the characters is given to speak,
Okay.
where he says something along the lines, "They're no longer people; they're alien functionaries molded by bureaucracy," which which I thought was brilliant. That was one of my favourite lines I've heard in the film all year.
Nice.
Oh yeah, I loved that. Alien functionaries molded by bureaucracy.
Glenn. The one thing I want to say about this film production wise is that I mentioned last time around Hidden Fortress was his last film Toho was in control of. In this case, Toho still distribute the film. Their logo still comes up at the start. But this was made by Kurosawa Productions and it was completely self-financed. So in a way, this is his Phantom Menace. This is him breaking out and doing it all himself. Which, as we'll see later on, doesn't necessarily do him well in the long run because the TV industry sort of kicks Japanese cinema hard in the balls, and he's kind of left carrying the bag a little bit, I think. But in this case, he seems to have been able to. I was going to say he seems to be able to have made the film his way, the way he wanted to do it, but that's broadly been the case all the way along, hasn't it? Everything we've seen about Kurosawa has been that he goes over time, he goes over budget, and the studio just learned to just let him have his way. But I guess he had even more of his way on this one.
I was going to say the only thing is his film seemed to have been cut for him a little bit, but sounds like it happened on this one as well anyway.
Yeah.
On international release at least. So, I mean, yeah. I don't really have much more to say about that.
I liked there's a scene where I think it's the Fujiwara character when he's first really down on his luck. Maybe he's going up the volcano to throw himself in, and he gets a case of the whenever someone's having a really bad day in one of these Kurosawa movies, they get that really dark, really heavy theatrical makeup on. And then after he's gone through that, it then becomes the turn of one of the other characters, the one who sees him and thinks he's a ghost. He suddenly has the really big, like, crow's feet and dark face and everything, like, really done up. And it's something I mentioned about I Live in Fear, actually, was how made up Mifune is in that film with a lot of makeup, and how I think the films being in black and white allow Kurosawa to kind of get away with this because it's so heavy. I mean, not even just get away with it. It's probably because it's black and white as well. That's the makeup needed to have the effect as well. But what I mean is if you took a color photograph of any of these actors when they've got that theatrical makeup on, they probably look fairly obviously kind of ridiculous. But it really, in the really like monochromatic cinematography of all of this, it's quite effective, isn't it? These people suddenly have this, like, it almost seems like something from a silent movie. Like I expect them to wander into the cabinet of Dr. Cagliari or something.
Absolutely. I mean, that is also to do with the monochromatic photography. Have you ever seen? Just double checking, I'd got the right program, but I had. You ever seen pictures of the Addams Family set?
No. Is it that sort of thing? Is it where you see them in color and?
Yeah, it's the set's bright pink and yellow because they're the ways to get the sort of grayscale when you shoot it in black and white. So the actual set's really quite colourful. It's just interesting.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking at pictures of it now. Oh, interesting. Yeah. To get the effect they wanted in black and white.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. So let's put it on the. I imagine it's going to go fairly high up. Let's share my screen, and we'll go to the part we call high and low. Where we're going to put the bad sleep well on the axis of appreciation and enjoyment. I'm assuming it's another top right in the clustered top right field. Where are you putting it?
I think.
But did you enjoy it more or less than Seven Samurai?
I think I enjoyed. This is the one I've enjoyed the most.
Right. Do you appreciate it more or less than Seven Samurai?
Let's say. I'm gonna say that I think it's on a par with Seven Samurai,
but more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, it's top of the tree.
I think that's probably right. Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting because your Letterboxd was a 4.5, and you've given a couple of them 5. So there is a feeling where you haven't you? Didn't you give Seven Samurai 5, or are you rocking 4.5
Probably.
Seven Samurai?
I usually have a 5-year policy for my 5 stars.
Okay, where they have to have gone past a certain.
No, I mean it's like a new film thing.
Yeah.
Like for new films, 4.5, and then you have to wait 5 years.
Okay.
So maybe I had that in mind, but I don't know. It's difficult to. I've only seen both these films once, and I saw Bad Sleep Well yesterday. But I'm probably not. I'm not going to revisit anything until we've finished the podcast. But I've got a feeling that I could probably put the Bad Sleep Well on and just sit through it at any time. It felt like something like Goodfellas to me, like just as if I wanted to watch something long and a bit involving, but still fun and still. If I wanted to watch a banger, I would put Bad Sleep Well on.
What's strange to me at this point is how
I think what it is for whatever reason, some films just become personal favorites.
Yeah,
and the Bad Sleep Well, I just really enjoyed it. Just really kind of, and it must have resonated with some of the other films, with me and some of the other films that I like. But it just felt. I think also because maybe it's also because it didn't have a reputation in the same way that some of the others had, that some things just take you slightly by surprise.
Yeah, it's also, I don't mean this in a really wanky way, but it's also kind of yours, right? Because the thing is that there is a thing, I know this is sort of pretentious, but there is a thing in general with pop culture where, that song from your favorite band that's suddenly a massive hit, it's kind of like you can't really like that one anymore. That's the one everyone knows. That's not my favorite. And I kind of feel like in a way we were saying about how this doesn't come with the reputation. It's like, if someone says, Craig, what's your favorite Kurosawa film? The Bad Sleep Well is a good curveball to throw out there, isn't it?
Yeah, you always want to do that. Always want and you can say it about lots of other famous directors that, like, my favorite Wes Anderson film is Rushmore, and it's always going to be Rushmore. That was the one that I saw at the cinema. It was the first one I saw, and it's slightly, the production design isn't as Wes Anderson-y as it's become as he's got more and more established. It's kind of that kind of side of it is all saved for Max's on-screen plays, if you like. There's always it's something about having a favorite that is just something about having a favorite that's that is a bit of a curveball. That is, I mean, it is a pretension, But
yeah. I mean, my favorite was
it's one of the joys of talking about film with people who know about film.
My favorite Wes Anderson film is Bottle Rocket, so there you go. But anyway, what was I going to say about this?
It's when you come across somebody who says the Darjeeling Limited. That's when you know that they're being contrarian to make a point.
I like that film.
I like it. It's not your favorite though, is it?
It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. No. Okay, so something that I think is interesting about this era, like watching them all again this time in order, is that I can see why Seven Samurai and Rashomon and stuff hit with audiences abroad, because they're obviously adding something very different, because they come with this exoticism to a certain extent, but they come with this kind of very obviously different culture, perspective, background, history that was interesting to a foreign audience. And that's why all of the Jidaigeki, as they're called, the period films, that's why they were distributed more widely in the West, and why a lot of his other films, The Bad Sleep Well, Ikiru, and others of that ilk, Stray Dog, weren't as well known outside of Japan. But
I do wonder if I wonder if this hit after Watergate, if it would have had a stronger.
Well, I was going to say, like, I'm curious watching them this time about how films like this didn't have a bigger impact in the West, just because the fact that this really does fit right in alongside a lot of the best 50s and 60s crime thriller noir films coming out of the US. It feels very,
but also like the bleak ending as well is very late 70s. It's very I can't remember who made Parallax for you, but those sort of who made those sort of kind of political conspiracy thrillers with bleak endings.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted your thought.
Alan J. Pakula was the Parallax.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a Pakula kind of.
Like a Pakula. It's like reminded me a lot of a Pakula, but 20 years before. Yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about it. Any closing remarks, any stray observations or little things you wanted to point out about it before we move on?
I don't think so. Other than the line about the alien functionaries, which was brilliant. I don't think there was anything else.
I made a lot of notes, but most of my notes were about the compositions and about the way that widescreen was being used and the way that there were always these kind of rotating people coming in and out, which doesn't sustain a lot of chat really. But that was just something that I was really fascinated. And I think if you watch the film, if the dear listener is going to go watch The Bad Sleep Well, perhaps for the second time after listening to this, watch it with that in mind, because it's really something, and it feels very intentional. It feels very intentional that the film always manages to get 3 people involved in any scene, and the way that it's only really towards the very end where we get scenes with a couple of characters in, as opposed to 3 where we get 2. We get the scene with Mifune and his wife, the Kagawa character, and we also get scenes between her and her father, the Mori character. But other than that, most of the film pretty solidly rotates these trios, these different combinations. Maybe it's the daughter, the son, and Mifune. Maybe it's the son and 2 of the businessmen. They're kind of rotating, and I found that really interesting. And it seemed to me that at the very, I know, Kurosawa's dead, so I can't ask him, but I would love to find out how much of that was how much of that was that he had a view before the writing stage where he really, a certain way he wanted to film this and use widescreen and block and have the characters move around the frame, and how much of it was written around that or to that, because it just, to me, did feel very intentional. But I don't have anything more intellectual to say about it. I couldn't say what it means, but I thought it was very interesting and it was very elegantly done. And I know I mentioned the blocking a lot in his films, but the way that the characters move around the frame in these compositions and is also really great, especially when they're these one-ers. There's these long single takes, everyone's hitting their marks and kind of moving around the frame. And I'm sure with everything we've read and learned about Kurosawa to this point, that some of these were probably rehearsed over and over again, and there was probably take after take after take on some of these to get them absolutely perfect. But they are, so I'm sure there was a lot of that kind of, you hear about Kubrick movies, that sort of exhaustion going on of people just sort of fed up with it. There's probably a little bit of that going on here as well, I would imagine, because some of these are quite intense, maybe 10 minutes of people just talking and hitting their marks. So anyway, next time we are going back into the Jidageki territory, back into one of his more famous in the Western world movies. One of the ones that I think people would say is probably his top 3 most famous movies, which is Yojimbo, which was famously remade without credit as A Fistful of Dollars. And it basically, like, I watched them the other way around. I saw Fistful of Dollars after I saw Yojimbo, and it is blatant. Like, it is scene for scene a remake. All Fistful of Dollars does is add a very boring, very long scene in a graveyard somewhere in the middle that I can understand why they've done that to the pacing. But yeah, so Shijimbo. So I normally ask you what your preconceptions are. Have you seen Fistful of Dollars?
No, I've not. I'm tempted,
right. Okay.
I'm tempted to watch that before our next podcast as well. No, I haven't. I've seen Django, which was supposed to be a further rip-off as well. I don't know how true that is.
Of Leone more than Kurosawa.
Yeah, I've not seen Last Man Standing. either, which was the Bruce Willis one set in
The
Prohibition
Walter
era.
Hill film, yeah.
Yeah, and according to BFI, there was one called Coyote Moon, which I've never even heard of.
I hadn't heard of that.
But I've got a vague. I don't really know anything about it at all, apart from the idea that there's a town divided by rival gangs, and that's it. I really,
yeah. Watch if you can watch the Leone one, because it's such a reference point. You know, like in pop culture, Clint Eastwood and the spaghetti westerns. Have you seen any of the Leone westerns?
Yeah, I've seen Once Upon a Time in the West and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and I've seen. It's not a western, but I've seen Once Upon a Time in America. So I'm familiar with Leone. According to the BFI as well, it says it's paid homage or spoofed in films ranging from Star Wars, Raiders, Miller's Crossing, which is one of my favorites, and Mars Attacks. So I'm wondering if this is going to be a case of when I watch it, I'm just going to have seen everything that's eventually lifted from it.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this on this podcast in the past or one of my other podcasts in the past, but like I had that relationship with Indiana Jones and with Raiders of the Lost Ark where it always fell flat for me. Like I don't care about Indiana Jones and I don't enjoy Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I think one of the reasons is because I watched it in my 20s, having already seen almost every frame of that film parodied in The Simpsons or whatever else. Everything had already been ripped out. So when I was seeing it, it wasn't like, oh, wow, he's outrunning that ball. It was like, this is the bit where he grabs his hat. This is the bit where he walks that guy. This is the bit, you know what I mean? It's every single bit. So I wonder in some respects if, but then again, probably not, because you haven't seen the Fistful of Dollars, which is the main kind of remake source of it. Anyway, I'm looking forward to watching it. We could do a double bill, that and Sanjuro, and do them both together. But I think there's possibly enough to say about both of them on their own. So,
yeah, well, why don't we
play it by ear?
We'll play it by ear, yeah.
All right then. Well, thanks for that, Craig. Thank you, dear listener, for listening /viewing, and we'll see you next